If I were to ask you why do you play games, I would expect your answer to be, well, because they're fun. However, today I want to sidetrack, and rather than talking about how fun a game can be, I want to talk about how balanced the game can be, and how that or the absence of such can lead to a game being fun. Game balance is a tricky subject to approach, because oftentimes it's the last worry for a lot of teams. Fighting games specifically are known to have upgradable patches to their games with a new addition named like Ultra or Super. That's why Street Fighter 2 remained one of the most sold games in the world, because instead of it being one game, it's actually technically 8. I mean, before Ryu was the world warrior, he was just a red-haired kid that could do a jumping uppercut. In fact, early access games are literally released ahead of time to be in a state where the fun is there but the balance may be a little bit off. And those games thrive off of people buying the game early, with the game being steadily patched and balanced to become more fun the more they play. This is a tricky place to be, because once you're in a place where a patch can make or break your game, player retention can always fall at an alarming rate. Look at Overwatch. If you look at that game 2 years ago and compare it to the game now, you'll think you're playing a different game, with the amount of abilities, character concepts, and many other things have changed. But the real difficulty with the idea of game balance is that it doesn't exist. A game that is balanced is a game that is boring. You may think that you don't want variety in your game and you want everything to be in your control, but trust me, a lot of the reasons why gaming has lived as long as it has and continues to grow is because it gives players the choice to do what they want to do. If you watch a movie, let's use the Titanic as an example. At the 2-hour mark, the Titanic will always sink. However, take a game like Final Fantasy VII, and one player can make it out of Midgar with the enemy skill and be at level 30, while another player could just barely get by. This is one of the strongest points of gaming in general, because it makes every experience that you have feel personalized. Although this game is going out to a million other people, you can make a million different choices. Especially with RPGs that give you options like that. Even with single player games, the way you choose to enjoy it is all up to you. Imagine if Dark Souls was a completely balanced game. Dark Souls would basically be you fighting a bunch of people that had the exact same health as you, with the exact same tools as you, and it would become very boring. Think about the idea of balance, two people being on the same playing ground. Games are one of the few mediums that actively puts its audience in a disadvantageous state in order to make them enjoy the medium more. Imagine you had to solve a Rubik's Cube to read a book, or a movie paused halfway through it and told you to solve a puzzle so that you were able to continue watching. You don't play a game to have a fair time, you play a game to overcome the challenges and have fun. Players are quick to accept this, and they go ahead and say, you know, I'm fine with Dark Souls beating me up a couple times, because man, that's how the game is supposed to be. They made the game to be difficult. That's the buffer people use. That's why you see Cuphead is the new Dark Souls, because the game needs to be difficult and they need to lament it as that to feel like they haven't lost. However, there's an understanding that multiplayer games need to have a better balance, because you're pitting players up against other players. What started off as, damn, this boss is pretty hard, I gotta just get better, turns into, geez, this character I'm playing against is broken, my character can't win this fight. Now, a lot of games try to shy away from this problem by giving the illusion that things are balanced. Take Valorant for example. Rather than the game being a test of aim, it's more of a test about strategy and trying to outplay the other teammates in planting a bomb. However, if you look at Valorant and play it a little bit longer, you realize that Valorant isn't CSGO, but is more like Overwatch. The game started off pretty deceptive, having characters that would have, you know, basic utility like dashing away or flashes and smokes, and that's pretty average for a CSGO type game. But looking at the progression of the game, you can clearly see the change in philosophy, from turrets being able to shoot people by themselves to characters being able to literally turn invisible, and not to mention other characters being able to fly a flash towards you. You may think that these changes will make the game unfair, but the game has always been unfair. CSGO is already an unfair game, if you really think about it. The entire idea of competitive multiplayer games is to make it as unfair for the enemy player as it is for you. Don't get me wrong. Getting shot by a Killjoy turret and then turning to shoot it and then getting killed by a killjoy yourself is really annoying. Same thing with getting flashed and sitting there for 4 seconds being blinded. But in the end of the day, the game is a lot more interesting having that. CSGO already exists. Valorant doesn't need to try and be CSGO, and they're not trying to be CSGO. And I think in the long run, it will help them a lot more by not trying to do that than it will by doing it. Whether or not you agree with these features, you have to acknowledge that Valorant as a game would be a lot less interesting without them. So you may ask, how do I enjoy my favorite multiplayer game if the game is made to be unfair from the start? It is the development team's job to make you feel like the game is fair. Trust me, no game ever made is completely fair to the player at all times. You may be able to write off certain experiences as you being new to the game or anything like that, but you can't use that excuse forever. So it is developers' jobs to give you mechanics and features that make the game feel fair. Let's take a look at some fighting games that do that. Guilty Gear Accent Core is an interesting game because everybody in that game is broken. I don't want to hear if you're tier list and who is, but nah, I'm not trying to hear none of that. There are 3-frame anti-airs. The game on a scale of balancing is a very unbalanced game. Guilty Gear is one of the few games that you can play against somebody who knows what they're doing, not a pro, somebody who knows what they're doing, and you wouldn't be able to touch them one time. I'm not sitting here to say Guilty Gear is a game that you can't play if you're new. If you're new, play the game you want. However, the reason why, although Guilty Gear may be a difficult game to play, people still want to play it is because the game gives you enough mechanics to make you feel like you can counter all the responses given to you. Dead angle is a thing, burst is a thing, guts is a thing. There are multiple features in the game that make you feel like, hey, although I may be losing right now, I could do something to make it feel better. No game ever needs to be balanced perfectly because you wouldn't want to play a balanced game. A balanced fighting game at least is having one character in the entire roster that has the exact same moves and frame data. Would you really want to play Street Fighter V if all you could play was Ryu? Nah, I'd want to play Guilty Gear if all I could play was Soul, but that's just me. It's all about variety. The same reason why you think your game is unbalanced and broken and you don't want to play it is the same reason why somebody else is having a good time. Think about that. The same reason why you hate a certain character is the same reason why somebody else loves it. And game developers are always looking to get new players into their game, which is the reason why a lot of times they'll prioritize mechanics to incentivize new players into playing. This is why comeback mechanics exist. You may think that V triggers exist because Street Fighter V and V and Roman numerals and all that bullshit, but that's not the reason why it exists. Same reason why in Dragon Ball FighterZ Spark exists. It doesn't exist to help better players or pro players. It exists for new players to not get upset with the game. It exists for them to solely think that no matter what time they have in the game or how down the score may be, they can always at least have a chance of winning at the end. However, just because something is fundamentally a comeback mechanic doesn't necessarily mean that it creates fake hype or doesn't give the game depth. V-Trigger literally gives you a chance once you're about to die to mix an opponent up and get a free win. But Street Fighter V without V-Triggers, just like how I used in the example before, would be boring. A lot of characters literally undergo changes just off of their V-Triggers alone, to the point that you can make a separate tier list entirely off of V-Triggers. It being a fun mechanic for you to use with characters and to use different ideas for it greatly outweighs the fact that it, in the end of the day, is a comeback mechanic. Add to the fact that you can do other things with it, like V-Reversals, that gives you another layer of defense, shapes a mechanic that started off as a comeback mechanic, but slowly becomes something that can be ingrained into the Street Fighter series. If you don't want to play a game because you think it's broken or characters are too cheap, it's not because characters are too cheap. It's because you can't handle the characters being the way they are. There's nothing wrong with the characters fundamentally. You just don't like playing against them or playing the game. I gave up DBFZ a year ago, not because I thought the game was broken, but because I didn't want to deal personally with what was broken about the game. No game is balanced. DBFZ is one of those games that's a little bit more unbalanced than, other games that aren't unbalanced, because no games are truly balanced. But man, I couldn't handle the unbalancing of that game. But I can handle the unbalancing of other games. With that note, I think I'm gonna head out. Anyway, stop blaming games for being unbalanced. The reason why you're sitting here watching this video and the reason why you're sitting there playing that game that you hate is because it's unbalanced. Get good.